Our next photographer learned photography from his father, who had a black and white darkroom in their home. And his ability to capture critical moments with an iPhone has led to collaborations with the New York Times, National Geographic, and Time magazines, and their Instagram platforms. Through these platforms, he is able to reach millions of followers to inform and educate on social and political issues in remote and underreported areas of the world. His dedication is truly awe-inspiring. Some of you may have heard Michael speak on yesterday's incredible panel discussion. He has been shot, injured by shrapnel, and kidnapped, all whilst covering conflict. And despite all of that, he carries on. Please welcome Michael Christopher Brown.
Hello. Good evening, everybody, and thank you for coming. Thank you, Xposure, Your Highness, for having me. This has been an amazing event. Made some new friends this week, and I'm excited to go home to see my baby, but at the same time, I could stay a few more days. The work that I'm going to show this evening, it's called Yo Soy Fidel. This is Spanish. In English, it means I am Fidel. This is a series of photographs that were made while the Freedom Caravan was happening. This was the name of the military convoy which transported the remains of Fidel Castro, the former president of Cuba, from Havana to Santiago. This is in late 2016. The project is also about serendipity, calculated risk and luck. But before I show that work, I'm going to give a quick overview of my experience in Cuba leading up into that point. Most of my initial trips to Cuba were spent with the youth of the island's electronic music scene. Their lives were a protest. They loved their country, but they realized they were not free. Mostly poor and living nocturnal lives, they escaped reality through music, $1 pizzas, and pharmaceutical drugs, including L-Dopa, which was created to treat Parkinson's disease. The CIA reported a few years ago that Fidel had Parkinson's, and if that is true, that in a way both he and these youth used it so they could survive. Most of these youth were in their 20s and their 30s, and they grew up at the height of Cuba's special period in the 90s, which followed the breakup of the Soviet Union, which had supported Fidel's government for 3 decades. Left without adequate resources, hunger, depression, and suicide were very common in those days. So in order to survive, Cubans were forced to help one another, and this created very strong bonds. These are traits that are still palpable nowadays among the youth who grew up in that time. They share everything, and they refer to each other as mi hermano, my brother. Without their friendship, I would have not understood Cuba nor Fidel in the same light. The writer John Lee Anderson wrote in the introduction for my book, Yo Soy Fidel, that in a country he had once said was godless, that in a country he once said was godless, Fidel was God, Father, brother, lover, and the ultimate son. And in his final years, he was grandfather, El Abuelo Eterno, the national wraith who stood up stubbornly for everything he had done to change Cuba in his younger days. For all his errors of judgment, the failures and the many penuries he had obliged Cubans to undergo because of his insistence that Cuba, as he saw it, be truly free, Fidel was, for many of his countrymen, a symbol of national pride. For his enemies, of course, Fidel was a despot. He was an egocentric dictator who had reshaped the national destiny and destroyed his people's lives in order to satisfy his own ego. Okay, so fast forward into the morning of November 2016, November 26, 2016. I was with my girlfriend, Lauren, visiting the provincial city of Trinidad in Cuba when my phone rang. We were actually not dancing at the moment I received the call, but I have the video here to show you the amount of fun that we were having. Someone from work was calling to see if I was available for an immediate assignment, though I did not understand what it was for, nor why it was urgent. The voice seemed to imply I must have known something, but I, half awake, asked if they would please email the details and I would soon be in touch. As we fell back asleep, Lauren remembers my saying how only something really urgent, like Fidel's death, would keep me out of bed. Hours later, we awoke. There was a knock at the door. Our host, this older woman in her 60s, casually asked if we would like eggs, fruit, bread, and coffee for breakfast, juice. Also, our father Fidel has died. I stood there, completely stunned. It felt as if a giant asteroid had hit the Earth. I had sensed Fidel's impending death earlier that year after he made an official farewell to the government. This flood of adrenaline now sped through me and inspired myriad thoughts, including how to explain to my beautiful new girlfriend that I needed to return into Havana immediately. So the next day, I dropped her off at the airport. She had a flight anyway, she was leaving. And I went to the press office, and where the government contacts that I had made in the previous couple of years enabled me to attain a press pass in a matter of hours, while many others had to wait for days. I then headed to Jose Marti Memorial in Havana, where there had already begun tributes and rallies in which hundreds of thousands of Cubans would attend. Cubans stood quietly in line for hours so they could see the memorial and attend the rallies for Fidel. Many Cubans assumed that they would see a casket or some artifact of Fidel's, but instead left quite baffled after waiting to see the same photograph they were bombarded with everywhere else that week, which was the same image on this building, which was made in the late 1950s during Fidel's revolution in the Sierra Madre Mountains. There were people crying and yelling and singing, and others who were simply quiet in a crowd that ranged from hardline Fidelistas to foreign visitors. Foreign heads of state, such as Nicolas Maduro of Venezuela and Evo Morales of Bolivia, visited to pay their respect. It seemed that no matter what someone thought of Fidel, that he had stood for something generated a certain respect. After the last rally, as everyone left the square, there was an incredible atmosphere sparked by a Cuban singer, and the people left holding hands, laughing and upbeat. And in a sense, the scene seemed to resemble a kind of utopia. So I had read that there would be a freedom caravan, which was intended to retrace Fidel's victory caravan route across Cuba after the revolutionary victory in 1959, when he and his bearded revolutionaries victoriously drove toward Havana in jeeps. This was a trip that helped solidify his image as a hero and a legend. This is a photograph by the American photographer Burt Glynn. The imagery from that day became recognizable to every Cuban alive. The Freedom Caravan was to leave the following day after the last rally and would transport the urn holding Fidel's cremated remains from Havana on a 4-day journey into Santiago, the capital of the region of his birth. Following the last rally, before dawn, thousands of Cubans lined up along the Malecon, the esplanade and roadway along the coast of Havana. Some had slept there to ensure they would see the Freedom Caravan. However, aside from some Cuban media, no press were granted access to accompany the caravan. The main route was to be lined with police, military, and state security and closed to all other traffic. But I resolved to try and join the caravan anyway. Because given the gravity of the event and an intuition that the government ultimately wanted the outside world to see large numbers of Cubans massed along the route, I imagined there might be a loophole. Because in places where the convention is suddenly undone, photographers are often able to do the unconventional, especially in less crowded areas like the rural areas outside of Havana. As a Cuban saying goes, Cuba is Havana, the rest is countryside. Here we have Fidel's urn inside a glass box surrounded by white roses. So on the first afternoon of the caravan, my former semi-truck driver chauffeur and I approached a stretch of the official route in Matanzas province using the same SUV that I had rented while on vacation with Lauren. With a Havana stamped press pass, flashing hazard lights, and hand-drawn press signs on all 4 corners, and leaning out the rear driver's side window and over the hood, I asked a policeman if he would let us pass. He radioed in our request to drive the route and was promptly granted permission. This is a video that I sent Lauren not long after that. When apart at that time, we often made videos of interesting situations we found ourselves in. This is MCB reporting live from Fidel Castro's convoy. We are in the front of the convoy, actually in the back of the first convoy here in Cuba. I have no idea how we got this access back to we expected at any moment that we would be blocked or detained or worse. Our intuition was not to stop, not to drive way too fast, and not to appear as incredulous as we felt. So every day we repeated this pattern, convincing security that we belonged in the caravan and had important work as we drove along the route, passing perhaps well over 1 million Cubans. There was a pacing element with the journey. We found that if we drove far in front of the caravan, the people would often be at rest or asleep, and if we were too far behind, the people would often be walking away or already back inside their homes by the time we passed. There were government employees such as police, physicians, gas station workers. There were bankers who stood alongside the farmers, the ranchers, and the school children, for hours, waiting for the caravan. There were community leaders who instructed crowds to recite cheers in preparation for the caravan passing. Very often the cheer was, "Yo soy Fidel, yo soy Fidel, yo soy Fidel." The highlight of the week occurred on the second day, when we drove well ahead of the caravan and we found that we were the only vehicle on the road. We drove for hours through countryside and small towns in the larger city of Sanctus Spiritus, where it seemed the entire population, over 140,000 people, were on the street silently watching us pass. Then, as the day began to close, as the night began to fall, we passed through the rural parts of Camagüey province. There we saw people standing out in the rain. Some were barefoot. Most were without umbrellas and cheering. Saluting, waiting patiently to see the caravan. There were few streetlights, so to make the photographs, I relied on the headlights of the taxis behind and in front of us. These taxis had seen us pass in a small town, seen us pass with incredulity, and decided they would also join the caravan as well. Then entering the city of Camagüey, the crowds were immense, cheering, singing, celebrating. Felt like the revolutionary atmosphere that I had experienced in other places. There was a tremendous optimism that was in the air, and for a moment I felt as if I was with Fidel's victory caravan of 1959. For some reason I began to cry. The tears were streaming down my face. So along the 1,000-kilometer long route, we saw few stretches of road that were without any people. They had traveled from the north and the south so they could watch the caravan pass. Folks walked for miles, or they came in on their scooters. Came in on their horses, horse carriages, their trucks and their buses, so they could stand on remote stretches of road, often many miles from the nearest town. The caravan passed through nearly all the provinces, including towns and cities that had been transformed by Fidel's policies over the previous 6 decades. And along the route, many Cubans stood hand in hand in a utopian appearance of bliss, which reminded me of propaganda scenes from North Korea, whose ambassador had visited Fidel's memorial in Havana. Sometimes, those standing along the route seemed astonished or at least bewildered to see us, especially when ours was the only vehicle within miles of the convoy. So at some point, my driver said to me, they probably think that you are the most they probably think that you are the most important photographer in the world to not only be on the route, but in front of the convoy, in front of Fidel. But more often than not, the people just watched us pass, standing patiently in silence. There was this beauty, there was a beauty about their stillness, as well as a kind of power. And I thought that it was as if they not only waited for the caravan, but also for their presence to be acknowledged. It was as if this was about them, not just Fidel. Near the end of the trip, we were coming into the outskirts of Santiago on the fourth day. Here we see Fidel passing by in his urn. There was another large rally. Then the following morning, Fidel's urn was interred in a giant boulder placed near the mausoleum of Cuba's most revered independence hero, Jose Marti. As John Lee wrote, Fidel saw himself as in the same league as these men. And in truth, his revolution was always more about defending the country's dignity in the shadow of the American Colossus than it was about socialism. Fidel said he didn't want his name on any signs or buildings, just on this boulder they had sourced from the Sierra Madre Mountains near his home. I realize now that the previous years I spent in Cuba were what prepared me for those days on the road. That everything I learned and felt about the country are evident in these photographs. So you have a little more context and a further feeling for what the experience was like. I'll play a short video that I shot along the way with some voiceover. This is voiceover that was that is from a journal entry made late one night after a long day on the road.
Wow, what a day. It was incredible today. It was a revolutionary atmosphere, just thousands of people in the streets. We somehow snuck in right behind the state security. There were dozens of them in these buses, and one of the guys warned us that we got lucky. We weren't supposed to be following the convoy, but he let us sort of go behind, where initially it was only us following them for hours and hours through these towns and even through Sancti Spiritus. They just assumed that we were like ahead of the convoy and a part of the show. The entire city of Sancti Spiritus on the street, and we literally drove through the entire thing lined with police and military. We discovered that we could get on the highway and the policemen just let us on. I showed the press badge, and then we started going, and then we realized that we were in front of the convoy. You know, people just lined up, evenly spaced a lot of times, in the middle of nowhere, as we drove by, and they would be singing, you know, or just standing there looking straight ahead, or doing a salute, or saying, Fidel, yo soy Fidel, yo soy Fidel, yo soy Fidel. What else? I'm burned out, I'm exhausted. I need to sleep more. Been in the sun all day, it's hot, shooting a lot. The logistics of everything is just complicated, but things are happening, and I feel lucky to be here. I feel like we were given this. I feel like the experience we had on this convoy today, sneaking in with the convoy and going behind and getting this incredible access as it travels across the country that can only happen in a case like this, where they want foreign media and they want press and they want the world to see how much their people love Fidel. You can just feel the energy and the love and admiration these people have for Fidel. It's incredible. Coming into Camagüey was just, I've never seen anything like it. It's like the revolution of '59 all over again. And as Joao pointed out, well, this is the end of the revolution. You know, the end of Fidel's revolution in a way. Or is it? But wow, what a show. Saying Fidel, yo soy Fidel, yo soy Fidel, yo soy Fidel. Everybody saying this. I was crying at some point, and tears streaming down my face. The driver couldn't believe it. Amar couldn't believe what was happening. He'd never seen anything like it. He said he was mystified. When Fidel died and they said they were going to carry his ashes across country, I knew there would be something very spiritual about the entire trip. And the trip is about these people on the road. They care so deeply about this man. It's just really amazing to see this.
So if you enjoyed the images, the book is available at the shop. Thank you very much.